They dragged a black maid through the aisles of a crowded supermarket, as if she were a criminal, right in front of her little daughter, who cried out that her father was a soldier who had already given his life. Her wrists bled where the cuffs cut deep, yet no one moved to help. A wealthy woman pointed at her, claiming her brand-new phone was gone, and the crowd began whispering. But hidden behind a shelf, a little girl clutched a slip of paper her late father had once given her. One call would set in motion a chain of events that no one in that room could imagine. How far would you go to protect your child's dignity? Would you stay silent when the world mocked you, or stand tall no matter the cost? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if stories of courage and injustice matter to you, hit like, share this video, and subscribe so more voices can be heard. Marissa Cole had never wanted attention. She was a mother, a housekeeper, a woman who knew the weight of silence and survival. But on that humid Saturday in Houston, silence was stolen from her. Two burly guards seized her arms as if she were a thief caught red-handed, their grip so tight she could feel her bones grind. "It was her!" cried the woman with polished nails and diamond bracelets, her voice slicing through the store's chatter. "She took my phone, my brand-new iPhone!" Gasps rippled down the aisles, eyes turned and whispers pricked her skin harder than the cuffs that cut into her flesh. Marissa's voice trembled but remained steady. "Search my bag. I have nothing to hide." She tried to stand tall, her uniform wrinkled from the struggle, her dignity pressed beneath the weight of suspicion. The store manager barely glanced at her. He nodded toward the guards. "Take her to the back." Children with ice cream stared as she was marched past. Shoppers raised their phones, recording her shame. Every step echoed louder than the last, pounding in her chest like a drumbeat of humiliation. Inside the cramped security office, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Officer Kane leaned against the desk, smirking as if he had already delivered a verdict. "Another one boosting electronics," he muttered into his radio. He dumped Marissa's belongings across the metal table. Diapers, cleaning rags, a grocery list scrawled in hurried pen. Not a phone in sight. Yet still, his sneer didn't fade. "Where'd you stash it?" he pressed, leaning close enough for her to feel his breath. Marissa lifted her chin, her voice calm though her wrists burned. "I didn't steal anything. I came here to buy milk for my daughter. That's all." Her eyes flicked toward Emma, who stood just beyond the doorframe, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Kane followed her gaze and then chuckled low. "Kids learn quick, don't they? They know when mama's lying." The words landed like stones, but Marissa refused to flinch. She whispered to her child, just loud enough for Emma to hear, "Don't be afraid. Remember what Daddy told us. Remember the number." Emma's small fists clenched around the folded scrap of paper in her pocket. In that instant, the little girl understood that her voice might be the only one that could save her mother. And while the world laughed and pointed, she slipped away, her sneakers tapping softly against the tile floor, running toward a phone that would awaken an old promise. Emma's tiny fingers shook as she pressed the worn numbers on the keypad, the slip of paper damp with sweat. She whispered into the phone, her voice breaking in places. "They took my mom. They say she stole. Please help us." On the other end, in a quiet control room at Fort Hood, a young duty officer froze mid-sentence, the hum of monitors filling the silence. The voice wasn't just frightened, it carried the weight of a promise. He straightened, recognizing the name scrawled on the note. Cole, the daughter of Sergeant David Cole, a man who had once given everything on a battlefield far from home. Without hesitation, he picked up a secure line. "Sir, it's happening. His little girl just called. They've got her mother in custody." Across the base, Colonel Richard Miller's hand paused above a stack of reports. He had known David Cole, had written the letter of condolence that never felt sufficient. Hearing his friend's name again through the crackling line struck something raw.
"Where is she?" he demanded. The officer's reply was clipped. "Houston Plaza, sir. Accused of theft. No evidence confirmed." Miller's jaw tightened. He closed the file before him, the weight of duty suddenly shifting from distant theaters of war to the heart of his own country. He stood, his voice measured but urgent. "Initiate protocol. Contact JAG. Notify military police on standby." As aides scrambled, Miller moved with the precision of a man planning an operation. His hand brushed the photo of his old unit framed at his desk, David's smile captured forever. He whispered under his breath, almost a vow, "Your family won't face this alone." Within minutes, calls rippled outward like shockwaves. A military attorney tucked legal codes into a briefcase and rushed for his car. A captain with a medical kit slung across her shoulder checked her watch and headed for the gate. Every piece aligned, not for a foreign mission, but for the defense of a widow and her child who had already given more than their share. Miller changed from his pressed uniform into plain clothes, dark jeans, a collared shirt, yet no disguise could dull the way he carried himself. Authority radiated from his posture, every step deliberate. As he left the barracks, soldiers straightened unconsciously, sensing command even in silence. He walked briskly to his vehicle, every motion fueled by quiet fury. On the highway, his mind played images he could never erase. The folded flag he had placed in Marissa's arms years ago, her eyes hollow but unbroken. The little girl clinging to her mother's dress, and now that same girl, older, dialing a number as if her life depended on it. He pressed harder on the accelerator, weaving through traffic as Houston's skyline loomed in the distance. He knew the world inside that mall would see only a housekeeper in handcuffs, a face they could dismiss. But he would see something else. The legacy of a fallen soldier, the dignity of a mother who had endured every hardship without complaint. 30 minutes. That was all it would take for him to arrive. 30 minutes to turn humiliation into reckoning. And as his phone buzzed again with confirmation from his team converging on Houston Plaza, Colonel Richard Miller's grip tightened on the wheel. This time, injustice would not have the final word.
The hum of fluorescent lights filled the cramped security office. Marissa sat slumped in a chair, wrists bound so tightly that a thin line of red streaked down her skin. Officer Kane leaned back against the desk with a smirk, twirling the keys of the cuffs between his fingers. He spoke as if her fate was already sealed. "You people never learn, always trying to outsmart the system." His words cut sharper than the metal biting into her flesh. The door swung open without warning. Richard Miller stepped inside, dressed like any other man on a Saturday, yet the room shifted with his presence. His eyes locked on Marissa first, then dropped to the cuffs digging into her skin. A stillness fell. Even the guards who had dragged her in stiffened without knowing why. In a voice steady as stone, Miller said, "Take those handcuffs off, now." Kane raised an eyebrow, his grin widening. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" He gestured at the ID badge on his own chest, as if authority needed no explanation. Miller stepped forward and set a worn military identification card on the table. The gold lettering caught the harsh light. Colonel Richard Miller, United States Army. He leaned closer, his tone sharp enough to slice the air. "I was the commanding officer of her late husband, the man who gave his life for this country, while you sit here mocking his widow. Now unlock those cuffs before you add another mistake to your record." For a moment, no one moved. Kane's smirk faltered. His hand hovered near the cuffs, then pulled back as if still testing the limits. He muttered, "Procedure says we wait until we finish the questioning." Miller's gaze hardened. "And which procedure authorizes you to cut into the wrists of a mother with no evidence in front of her child? Show me the page, show me the line." The room felt smaller, the silence louder. Even the store manager shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to the exit. Marissa sat upright, shoulders straightening as the weight of humiliation lifted just slightly. Emma peeked from the doorway, hope flickering across her frightened face. Miller did not raise his voice, but every word carried authority earned from decades on battlefields. This is your last chance. Remove them. Kane finally moved, fumbling with the keys. The metallic click echoed as the cuffs opened, revealing angry welts across Marissa's wrists. She exhaled, steady, refusing to let pain show. Miller turned to the guards. Medical attention, now. And to Kane, his voice dropped lower. You've already written the beginning of a report. You'll spend the rest of your career explaining. No one laughed this time. The balance of power had shifted, and every man in that room knew it.
The air inside the office grew heavier as Miller's words still hung like a blade. Marissa rubbed her raw wrists, the angry marks shining under the harsh lights. Kane shifted uneasily, but tried to mask it with a shrug, muttering something about procedure. That was when a sound cut through the silence. A sharp chime, muffled but unmistakable, rising from the expensive purse on the lap of the woman who had accused Marissa. Every eye turned, the woman's face drained of color as she fumbled with the bag, pulling out a glittering phone that lit up with an incoming call, the same phone she had sworn was stolen. Gasps rippled across the room. One of the guards cursed under his breath. Miller's voice was low, controlled, but it carried through every corner. "Would that be your missing phone, ma'am? Or do you usually carry two identical ones?" The woman stammered, her manicured hands trembling. "I must have overlooked it. A simple mistake, no harm done." Marissa stared at her, stunned, the sting of humiliation surging through her chest. Miller stepped closer, his presence towering without raising his tone. "No harm. My soldier's widow was paraded in front of strangers, cuffed until she bled, her daughter forced to watch. Tell me, where is the harm in that?" The store manager opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked at the floor, sweat beading on his temple. Miller turned to the security supervisor who had lingered in the corner. "Check the footage, now." The man hesitated, then scurried to the console. Fingers flew over the keyboard and the monitors flickered to life. Grainy images rolled backward, then froze. The woman was there, her polished frame bending over her shopping bag. The camera caught the subtle motion as she slipped her own phone into the folds of fabric, glancing left and right before straightening her posture. "Play it again," Miller ordered. The sequence repeated, undeniable. This time even the guards leaned forward, their jaws set tight. The young one whispered, "She planted it. She knew exactly what she was doing." Marissa felt her throat close. Emma clutched her hand, eyes burning, but with vindication. For the first time since the nightmare began, Marissa saw belief reflected back at her instead of suspicion. Miller stepped closer, his gaze sweeping the room. "So before another word is spoken, let us all be clear. A lie dragged this woman into chains, and every second it continues is one more mark against your conscience." No one dared answer. The room stood suspended in a silence so loud it drowned out even the buzzing lights.
Outside the security office, a crowd had already gathered, pressed shoulder to shoulder against the glass. Some held up their phones, capturing every second, their lenses catching the sight of a housekeeper, once humiliated, now sitting upright with her daughter's hand in hers. The whispers grew into shouts, voices breaking the sterile silence of the mall. People were angry. People were watching. One shaky clip hit social media within minutes, and the tide turned like a storm. Hashtags lit up screens. Hashtag Justice for Marissa began climbing, spreading from one city block to the next. By the time the mall's public relations officer rushed in, his phone was already buzzing with news alerts. Cameras flashed from the entryway. Local reporters squeezed into the doorway, microphones raised, faces eager for a headline. Colonel Miller stood firm, blocking the view of Marissa, as if shielding her from the onslaught. A journalist shouted, "Colonel, is it true this woman was falsely accused?" Another yelled, "Do you plan to press charges against the store?" Miller didn't answer. His silence carried more weight than a speech. Officer Kane tried to step forward, tugging his badge into plain view. "This is still an active investigation," he barked, but his words were drowned out by jeers from the hall. A man's voice rose clear. "Investigation? You handcuffed a mother without evidence." Others joined, clapping, chanting Marissa's name. The walls that once closed her in now trembled with the roar of strangers demanding justice. The store manager wiped his forehead, eyes darted toward the exit. He whispered to Kane, "We need to contain this. It's spiraling out of control." But there was no control left. The truth had already slipped beyond these walls. A heavy-set man in a tailored suit pushed through the door, introducing himself as counsel for the mall. His smile was smooth, but his eyes betrayed panic. "Colonel Miller," he said quickly, "perhaps we can resolve this quietly. Our client deeply regrets the misunderstanding. We are prepared to offer a settlement for any discomfort experienced." He placed a crisp envelope on the table, the weight of hush money inside. Miller glanced at Marissa, who stared at the envelope without moving. Emma squeezed her mother's hand, her small voice barely audible. "We don't need their money, Mom." The child's words cut deeper than any lawyer's bargain. Miller pushed the envelope back across the table with one finger. His tone was flat, cold. "No settlement. This will be handled where it belongs, in the light, not in the shadows." The lawyer's jaw tightened. Outside, chants grew louder, echoing through the atrium like a rising drumbeat. For the first time since the ordeal began, Marissa saw strangers standing on her side, a crowd that refused to let her story be buried.
The ambulance lights painted streaks of red across the night as Marissa was led through the hospital entrance. Emma clung to her side, refusing to let go of her hand even when nurses urged her back. Inside the emergency room, the antiseptic smell mixed with the muffled sound of voices and footsteps echoing down the hall. A doctor leaned over Marissa's wrists, shaking her head at the sight of deep, raw welts carved by steel. She spoke softly. "These were applied with unnecessary force. She'll scar if they're not treated properly." Photographs were taken, each flash capturing the evidence of cruelty. Emma stood by the bed, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had not cried since leaving the mall. Instead, she held herself with a fierce stillness, the kind a child should never have to learn. Marissa tried to smile at her daughter, but her lips trembled. "I'm all right, baby," she whispered, though the sting of the antiseptic made her flinch. Down the corridor, Colonel Miller's voice carried as he spoke into his phone. "We need full documentation, legal, medical, every angle. They will not sweep this under the rug." His tone was the same one soldiers had followed into battle. Moments later, a military attorney arrived, briefcase snapping open with papers ready. "We'll file immediately. What happened today will not disappear into silence." The hospital doors swung again, and reporters surged forward, their cameras cutting through the fluorescent light. Security held them back, but questions pierced the air. Was this racial profiling? Will the family sue? How will the police respond? Each word added pressure. Each flash reminded Marissa that she had been dragged into a story she never asked for. The hospital administrator appeared, his expression cautious. "There's concern about the crowd gathering outside. We can offer a private exit if you'd prefer." Before Marissa could answer, Emma shook her head. "No,
They need to see us walk out. They need to know we're not afraid." The firmness in her small voice silenced the room. Miller looked at Marissa, his eyes steady. "You have a choice. Accept their hush money and move on quietly, or stand and fight. But it won't be easy." Marissa gazed at her daughter, at the bravery in those young eyes, and she felt the echo of her husband's sacrifice. She lifted her bandaged hands, trembling but resolute. "We're not taking their money. Not tonight, not ever. If we walk away, they'll keep doing this to others. It ends here." The room grew still. Outside, the chants of strangers seeped through the walls, a reminder that the battle had already begun. Morning headlines blared before the sun was fully up. Local stations replayed shaky cell phone footage of Marissa being dragged through Houston Plaza, her wrists bleeding, her daughter running behind. The story spread fast, carried from one living room to another, until it was no longer just about a phone or a store. It was about power, humiliation, and the silence of too many voices before hers. But with the light came resistance. A statement from the police union hit the airwaves before breakfast. Officer Kane was described as a dedicated veteran of the force, unfairly targeted by what they called a wave of social media hysteria. They called Marissa's ordeal a routine detention, exaggerated by outsiders with an agenda. The words stung as they rolled across the television screen in the hospital waiting room. Emma turned to her mother, whispering, "They're lying about you." Marissa pulled her daughter close, brushing the girl's hair back from her face. Truth doesn't vanish because they deny it. Yet even as she spoke, doubt pressed heavy on her chest. Colonel Miller entered with a stack of printed articles, each headline more pointed than the last. One from a prominent paper questioned whether Marissa had acted suspiciously in the store. Another ran a profile of Kane, showing him smiling beside his family, painting him as a man under siege. Miller dropped the papers onto the table. "They've hired professionals," he said flatly. "This is narrative warfare." That afternoon, the phone in Marissa's hospital room rang with a new kind of threat. A voice, low and steady, warned that people who stirred trouble often regretted it. The line went dead before anyone could trace it. Hours later, a package arrived at her doorstep, spray-painted with slurs. Emma saw it before Marissa could shield her, the girl's face hardening with something far older than her years. The blows kept coming. A scholarship committee sent notice they were reconsidering Emma's future application because of character concerns. The mall's lawyers increased their settlement offer, sliding more zeros onto the page, along with a gag order that would silence Marissa permanently. That evening, community leaders gathered outside the hospital. Some held candles, others carried signs. Their voices rose in unison, chanting her name, drowning out the spin of television anchors and the cold statements of press releases. Marissa stood by the window, Emma at her side, watching strangers fight for them. Her voice broke as she whispered, "If we back down, they win." Emma's small hand found hers, squeezing tight. "Then we don't back down."
The conference room smelled faintly of stale coffee and paper, its blinds drawn tight against the swarm of reporters outside. Marissa sat at the far end of the table, her bandaged wrists resting on the wood. Emma leaned against her, eyes sharp, taking in every word, though no one had asked her to stay. Across from them sat two attorneys, one in a crisp navy suit with military insignia pinned discreetly on his lapel, the other a civilian with a voice made for courtroom battles. The civilian lawyer spoke first, his tone calm but urgent. "We have grounds for a civil rights lawsuit. What happened was not an accident, it was a pattern. Filing now could set precedent nationwide." He slid a folder forward,
filled with witness accounts, video clips, and disciplinary records no one had expected to see the light of day. Before Marissa could respond, the door opened and the mall's corporate representative entered, a polished woman with pearls at her throat. She placed a sleek envelope in the center of the table and smiled as though the outcome were already written. "A settlement," she said smoothly. "7 figures. Confidentiality guaranteed. No trial, no headlines. Your family can move on." Emma's small voice cut through the heavy silence. "Move on? After what they did to her?" Her words made the representative blink, caught off guard by a child's defiance. Marissa stared at the envelope, her reflection faint in its glossy surface. The number inside could pay off every debt, buy a home, even cover Emma's education. For a moment, her shoulders sagged beneath the weight of temptation. But then she remembered the way the cuffs had cut into her skin, the way Cain had smirked, the laughter that had echoed when she begged them to believe her. She pushed the envelope back across the table. "This isn't about money. If I sign that paper, nothing changes. Someone else will be dragged through those doors tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. My daughter deserves a world where this ends." Colonel Miller, silent until now, leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the corporate envoy. "You thought you could buy silence. Instead, you've just guaranteed this will go public." The representative's smile cracked, the polished veneer slipping. She gathered the envelope with trembling fingers and left without another word. Marissa looked down at Emma, who was still holding her hand tight. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. The girl nodded once, firm. "We don't take their money, Mom. We fight." In that quiet room, a decision was sealed, not just to defend themselves, but to pull others out of the shadows with them.
The courthouse steps were crowded before dawn. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras trained on the doors where Marissa and Emma would soon appear. Inside, the courtroom hummed with tension. Every bench was filled, supporters clutching handmade signs, skeptics leaning forward with crossed arms, attorneys shuffling thick stacks of paper. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if everyone knew the outcome here would ripple far beyond one family's struggle. When Marissa entered, she did not bow her head. Her bandaged wrists were no longer wounds to hide, but proof of what had been done. Emma walked beside her, her small shoulders squared, refusing to be left in the shadows. Colonel Miller followed, his presence commanding silence without a single word spoken. The judge called the session to order, her gavel striking like thunder. The prosecution rose first, projecting the footage on a large screen. Grainy images filled the room, the elderly woman slipping her own phone into her bag, her eyes darting before she cried out in false alarm. Gasps rippled through the spectators. Next came the recording of Cain tightening the cuffs until Marissa winced, his dismissive tone playing like a soundtrack of arrogance. The defense tried to dismiss it as misunderstanding, as procedural necessity, but their words fell flat against the stark reality glowing on the screen. When Marissa was called to testify, the room stilled. She spoke with a calm that carried more weight than anger ever could. "I told them to search me. I begged them to check the cameras. Instead, they cut into my wrists while my daughter watched." Her voice did not rise, yet every word pressed heavy on the hearts of those who listened. Emma was next, her small voice trembling at first, then firming with every sentence. "They called my mom a liar. They laughed when she said my dad was a soldier, but he was. He died serving this country, and they treated her like nothing." Her words broke something in the room that no lawyer's argument could mend. When the verdict came, it rolled like a wave across the benches. Officer Cain, guilty of excessive force and civil rights violations. The accuser, guilty of filing a false report. The corporation, liable for discriminatory practices, ordered to fund scholarships in Marissa's name and submit to federal oversight. Marissa closed her eyes, Emma's hand in hers, the weight of the judgment sinking in. It was not revenge. It was recognition. And as the crowd outside erupted in cheers, the message was clear. A mother's dignity had been restored, and a door to change had been forced open.
A year later, the building that once echoed with accusation looked different. The polished glass of Houston Plaza now reflected banners of change. Where the security office once confined Marissa in shame, a community center had been built. Inside, rows of chairs filled with students, families, and veterans faced a small stage where a podium waited. At its base stood a plaque etched with new words, "The Cole Foundation for Justice and Education." Marissa sat in the front row, her hands no longer scarred, but still bearing faint lines that memory refused to erase. Emma stood beside her in a bright dress, taller now, her chin lifted with the quiet strength of someone who had seen the world's cruelty, yet chosen courage. The crowd hushed as her name was called. She climbed the steps, her small fingers brushing the podium's edge, and looked out at the faces before her. "My mom was once marched through these halls in handcuffs," she began, her voice steady. "They told us our dignity didn't matter. But we are here today to prove they were wrong." Applause swelled, breaking through the quiet. Emma smiled, but did not falter. "This scholarship is not just for me. It is for every child told they don't belong. It is for every mother silenced by fear. It is for every family who deserves more than apologies whispered behind closed doors." Colonel Miller watched from the aisle, arms folded, pride shining through the lines etched deep in his face. He remembered the night she had called, the desperation in her small voice, and now saw the same girl standing where no fear could reach her. Marissa joined her daughter on stage, her hand resting lightly on Emma's shoulder. "We did not win by taking money to stay quiet. We won by refusing to bow, and every step forward belongs to all of us." The audience rose to their feet, a sea of clapping hands and tear-filled eyes. Outside, cameras rolled, broadcasting the moment across the nation. Not a story of humiliation, but of transformation. The chants that once demanded justice now carried hope, echoing through the atrium. No more silence. As the first scholarships were announced, Emma's name was not among them. She didn't need it. She had already earned her place at a university that saw her not as a victim, but as a leader. For Marissa, it was never about erasing the past. It was about building something greater from its ashes. And as mother and daughter walked out together beneath the Texas sun, the doors that once closed behind them now stood wide open.